Our guest today, Pete the Tech Man Coman, is the CTO of the PTS Consulting Group. And why don't we bring him on in? Let's talk about this. Pete, are you with us? There
I
you
am.
are.
I
Look
am,
at
Justin.
that.
It's an honor to be
Beautiful.
on the show. Great to see you again.
Oh, are you kidding me? Oh, thank you. Well, it's great to have you. I can see that you're clearly a real AV person. Those are those like flashy, like programmable LED lights on the wall behind you, right? Am I right? Are those the purple and white hexagons?
But the lamp is programmable with different colors.
Okay, that's what I meant. I meant the lamp.
Yeah, they're acoustic panels. Come on, we need good acoustics. Always need good acoustics.
Okay.
So they're acoustic panels.
See, that's precisely what I said. I'm sorry if I was unclear. Pete, welcome to the show. Let's start out with some definitions, right? So for the two kinds of networks we talked about are I'm gonna name them and you're gonna define them. We'll play that game. I think there are converged networks, and there are island networks, or maybe AV island networks. Does that ring true to you? And if so, define those terms for me.
Sure. Yeah, it absolutely rings true. A converged network is, some people think of a converged network as utilizing the same cabling infrastructure as IT, but a true network convergence is really the coexistence of multiple systems. For example, like you have your data or IT, your telephony, the AV, security, allowing these disparate systems to connect and communicate on a single IT network with segregation being provided by virtual VLANs or VLANs. Yeah.
Okay. So a customer comes to you and he says, "Go ahead."
I was going to say, you're talking about island networks or what we call shadow networks. There's a network that is totally isolated or segregated and not connected to the main IT network. It's typically unmanaged and it's typically installed without the approval of the IT department. Unmanaged silo shadow networks pose a huge security risk to any organization, so it should be avoided at all costs.
Wow, that's a very strong statement. I was just about to explore. Let's talk pros and cons. Let's talk pluses and minuses. But you're saying avoid it at all costs. First of all, I took a note here. Shadow. We're not calling them island networks. We're calling them shadow networks. I love that. So that's a change right here on my note card. Avoid it at all costs. So let me play devil's advocate, right? I'm the AV team. I'm scared of those IT guys. Every time I go to them and I say I need something for the network, they tell me no, or they tell me I got to pass this security level, blah, blah, blah. I don't even know what that means. You know what, Pete? It's just a couple of switches. I'm going to set up a couple of switches, just like I used to do with a matrix, and I'm going to run my cables, and I'm going to have my AV over IP. Nobody needs to know better. Come on. Why not?
Well, if you're going to do that, Justin, I hope you've got really good insurance, because if something goes wrong and that network is hacked, the fingers are all going to be pointing directly at you. And I just wouldn't take that chance. I really wouldn't take that chance. Obviously we hear it in the news every day. There's so much hacking that goes on with all these networks. Companies being held to ransom. Last year there was the oil pipeline or the gas pipeline or something in the US, and they were held to ransom. And they paid the money. Like, why take that chance?
Yeah. Okay.
It's just not as secure. You can't. The reasons why you would be the advantages for sort of being on a managed network is that you've got the IT architect team, the IT managers. They're managing these switches. They're managing the network. They're controlling the network. They're testing devices before they go on the network to make sure that they are secure and they're not going to cause any problems and there's no vulnerabilities. And this is what I'm saying about why would you take that risk when if you get on well with the IT team and what was mentioned before, you turn around and you say, look, these are the risks, here's all the information, here's the device, give all that to the IT team, and if they let it on their network, then they're now taking responsibility for that.
That was where I was going to go next. I'll be honest, I have zero insurance that I think would cover me in this case, which is why I don't install networks for anybody else. But yeah, it sounds like this is about, look, the IT team already has responsibility and ownership over the network. And so it sounds like our role as the AV professional is to be a service provider, is to be a subject matter expert, but is to allow them to maintain that level of responsibility that they have, rather than trying to take it on ourselves. Why would we do that? It doesn't make
Exactly.
sense.
No, no.
What
And
about
look, a lot of
is
the responsibility needs to really reside with the AV manufacturers. I mean, they're producing this product. I mean, what I find hard to believe is that a lot of them, even the very biggest ones in our industry, have so many IT security vulnerabilities, you know, in their products. They're not. A lot of them aren't compliant with IT standards and security requirements, and it baffles me. I mean, we've been putting more and more devices on the network for many years. This is nothing new. They should be compliant. If all these other IT manufacturers can make compliant equipment, why can't the AV industry?
well, fair enough. What do you see out there in actual fact? Do you see, in other words, how often do you see shadow networks versus people embracing convergence?
You see shadow networks all the time, and I think it depends on which part of the world that you're in as well. You know, what region. Where I'm from, in Australia, in sort of Asia Pacific region, you see a lot more converged networks because the
Interesting.
the IT department understand the security risks and they accept it and they take it on and they own that responsibility. In the US, from what I've seen, there's not a lot of converged networks. I mean, we recently finished a project here in New York that's a fully converged network. And I mean, there was obviously you're going to have some hurdles along the way. We found out some products didn't do what they were supposed to do, and there's always going to be some issues. However, at the end of the day, I mean, this client is a bank, and they need to have the highest security, and they're not going to allow shadow networks to exist. I mean, on that particular project, I mean, the BMS contractor rocked up to site with a 4-port Netgear switch that they probably bought at Best Buy for $29, right? And it was just like, it's not going anywhere near this network, champ. So yeah, that we quickly we quickly sorted that one out.
I had a friend who was once doing some troubleshooting on a U.S. Department of Defense site, and the story was he accidentally plugged his laptop into, I think, a blue Ethernet port instead of a green Ethernet port, whatever the color code was. And only moments later, men with machine guns showed up to inquire, what precisely are you doing? So that's network security. These are people who take shadow networks very seriously as well.
Absolutely.
Something you just touched on about, some of the products maybe didn't behave the way you had anticipated or hoped on the network. In the piece we talked about in the news, and I'm gonna quote it because I took some notes from it here. Rachel said, sometimes you have to live without aspects of ideal delivery if the IT team considers them potential threats. Maybe talk about, in your experience, what are some examples of times that you've kind of said, here's what I really wish I could do, but out of respect for the network, for the IT team's demands, we're gonna tone that down somehow.
Yeah, sure. I'm trying to. I can give you plenty of examples. I'm just make sure I sort of edit out all the manufacturers' names. But
Sure.
like for instance, room booking panels. We with that particular client that I just was referring to, where we did the fully converged network, we had room booking panels outside each room. Now, the thing is that we couldn't actually use those room booking panels because they had an old version of Android on it. And the client,
Okay.
has a minimum requirement. It has to be Android 10 or higher. So those panels then became just dumb panels. We had the room name on the outside and just a picture of, each of these rooms were named kind of after a national park. So we had a nice image there, and it just had the room name on it. So the compromise there is that these room booking panels, which were supposed to be connected up to the client's network, they're supposed to be running Microsoft Teams, couldn't do it. Just couldn't do it. And until that manufacturer updates the firmware, we can't then deploy it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that makes sense. Um, I'm thinking that the context that we're talking about here is mostly about pretty large, what I would call high-end end users, right? We're talking about big enterprise stuff, I think, and I think that's most of
Correct.
what you work on. How does
Yep.
how does this same story impact the smaller business, right? The folks who have AV and IT infrastructure, but maybe don't have a 25 person IT team as well as a small AV group. Should they, without exception, be building converged networks? Or is the complexity of that so high that maybe shadow networks make sense as long as they know what they're getting into? What are your thoughts for the smaller guy?
Sure. Yeah, and you're right. I mean, the references that I've been giving have all been to do with enterprise networks, so like higher end clients. If you're talking about a smaller business, look, it's like anything. You're trying to gauge the risk, aren't you? Yeah, that's what it comes down to. You can get away with it. Typically, the reason why you deploy a shadow network is because the network switches, they're cheaper. Typically, they're quicker and easier to deploy. You're not jumping through all these hoops. You're not getting approval for anything. So you could deploy a system a lot quicker and a lot easier. And a lot of the skill sets that are required to configure these networks, like you said, typically reside with a 20-person IT team. So look, as I said, it just comes down to that risk. I advise all our clients not to do it. If you're going to put it on the network, if it needs a network connection, it should be connected to the client's network where where they're managed. The switches are in secure locations. Hopefully there is a management plan to update and patch the switches as required. Because typically, if you're talking about a shadow network, a switch is deployed, no one touches it, and it sits there, and it has, 5 years later, it's got 1,000 vulnerabilities.
Mm. Wow. Yeah, tricky stuff. Well, in just the about 30 seconds that we've got here left, I said I got 30 seconds left, and then I lost track of my question for it. How fast has this been changing? That's what I wanted to hear. 10 years ago, I don't think a lot of people were converging these networks. Today, everybody should be. What's the trend?
Yeah, I remember probably back in sort of, 2012, 2013, that kind of era, where I was saying to the AV contractor, these projectors, they need to go on the network, and they were pushing back and saying RS-232, it's more reliable and blah blah. But we can't get the same kind of management tools available to us that we can with IP connections. So it has been happening for some time, and once again, I think it depends on the region that you're in. But I think we've been putting devices on networks for sort of coming on 10 years now. Right, but it has. I think it needs to start really with the design, and to need to get a good consultant on board who can actually go through this process with the client and help vet out the products that maybe don't meet the client's standards. Rather than the last thing you want to do is just give all this product to the IT team, the IT manager, and let them try and sort it out. They'll hate you forever. Like test it out yourself, get all the information you need, provide it to them so they can turn around and make informed decisions.